Sometimes I like going back to games I used to play as a kid and just go through them once again. I might know every secret dungeon layout and boss pattern, but I come back partially due to nostalgia and also because they are nice to experience once again. Mystical Ninja Starring Goemon is a game where I know where every cat figurine is located. It's a game I get frustrated at for its flaws. It's a game where I go back and enjoy the music along with the usually colorful levels they inhabit. The game to me is an experience, one that isn't perfect, but I always enjoy coming back even with the minor frustrations. I first played this game at a friend's house, a friend who seemed a little more privileged than me at the time, having both a PlayStation and an N64. Whenever we weren't playing outside, we'd come in and play games for hours, and on one of those days I was introduced to a game that played like Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time, but was a little more brighter, a little more energetic, and a little bit weirder. Once in a while we would restart the game from the beginning because we either didn't have a memory card or the memory card wouldn't read properly. I don't remember exactly, but we'd always get stuck at the same part. A part that I always thought was cool. It was the first giant robot battle. We'd call upon Impact the giant robot, hear the theme song, smash through some small robots, and then jump into the first-person robot battle. The reason why we usually get stuck at this part was because we didn't own the manual and we didn't know the fighting combinations. We'd always get stuck at the same part, fighting for what seemed like ages and either beat the boss or the boss would beat us. It was only later with the help of the internet we wrote down the combos and consistently kicked the robot's ass. Mainly due to using the Mega Charge-Up Mouth Laser blasting off chunks off of the boss's health bar. But for much of my early experience, I was hooked by the amazing music, the giant boss battles, and the sort of hit or mainly miss humor. Every time I think of this game, the soundtrack is one of the first things that come to mind. The starting music of Edo Town is so upbeat, it just frames the game as a fun adventure. And when you get to the first dungeon, the transformed Edo Castle, it uses traditional Japanese instruments to a great effect of pushing you forward toward your goal. Not all music was upbeat. Some were serene, like Under the Japanese Sea. Some were almost haunting, like Folky Poke Village before you save the kidnapped kids. And some were kind of goofy, like the mini-game fight with Benkai. But I think my favorite music is from the musical castle toward the end of the game. It is so full of energy and it just feels epic. The overall soundtrack stands out because it feels like it's celebrating Japanese culture. Before its release, I had not heard anything like it. That is why I think this game is so unique. It has players traveling all throughout an alternate Japan where almost everything seems like an older Japan, but there's also robots, submarines, and talks about making movies in America. It was the first time I had experienced a game so culturally focused on Japan. Besides the culture shock, what really hooked me was that it was like an easier version of Legend of Zelda. Less focused on puzzles and more focused on going through unique settings, collecting keys, and eventually getting to a boss, be it in a mech battle or a more smaller scale. Something I learned years later was that if you beat the game and collected all the cat dolls, which were like Zelda's heart pieces, you would unlock consecutive fighting boss battle mode, where you would be able to fight against all 4 giant robot battles in a row. I don't remember if I've beaten it more than once, but the one time I remember was last year. For all I can remember is that all you get is a congratulations for beating them all. Another thing that was cool was the fact that you could switch between 4 characters with unique tools and skills, almost whenever you wanted, be it for certain situations or just personal preference. Goemon could go Super Saiyan and use a hookshot-like pipe, Yai could transform into a mermaid and use a flute to call a dragon for fast travel, Sasuke could use a jetpack to get to higher locations, use bombs to break cracked doors, and use frozen kunai to cool down hot platforms. and Ibitsumaru could shrink in size to go through small doors, use a camera to find hidden platforms, or to expose ghosts to get hit. Though there were some tools and skills I rarely ever used, like Yai's bazooka, Yai's whirling sword shield, or Goemon's money throwing attack, except for when it was needed for puzzles. Another thing I rarely used was the crawl function. It never really felt like it was a needed skill, but you could attack while crawling. The only times I ever used that was when I was fooling around. And while fooling around, I found out they put in work for the characters to have several movement animations. Like whenever I play around with Ibitsumaru, I like to slow him down and then work my way up from tiptoeing to doing a slow skip to him flailing his arms around running. Also, I find it unique that his crawling animation is scooting around on his back, basically to emphasize the point that he is a comic relief type character. There's so much stuff in this game that I love, but I think I should focus on the things I cannot ignore, and they sort of annoy me. Starting off, I'd like to say that the platforming, when it does come up, is pretty stiff at points. I've had moments where it feels like I'm hitting a wall while jumping, highly emphasized whenever you jump down a slope. It feels horrible when you think you timed to jump correctly, and then plummet down to open space, because the jump arch is so stiff, you will have to try the jump over again, sometimes multiple times. A lot of times I think it comes down to just getting used to the jump after a while, but even to this day I use Sasuke's jetpack jump whenever I'm unsure I'll make a jump in the musical castle toward the end of the game. Another thing to fight, especially when trying to jump, is the camera. There's no direct control of the camera, unless it's in a unique situation where it's rotating around something like a boss. It is normally slowly adjusting to your movements, making it so that if you want the camera directly behind the character, you will have to stop all movement and wait for the camera to rotate. Sometimes you'll have to adjust the character because the camera can get stuck on some parts of the environments. I have had plenty of situations where the camera was detrimental to the platforming. Another thing that is made slightly worse from the camera is the camera angle when trying to pick up the camera in the claw game. I've wasted so much time in the claw game because if you miss, there's no way to skip watching the claw come back with nothing. It is such a trial and error experience, made worse by the amount of time spent waiting on all the errors. Nowadays I usually do better, but it was an annoyance as a kid, and still is today when it happens. Another slight annoyance of the time-wasting variety is the fish collecting job in Town. Instead of getting a full list of the fish the guy wants, he will only tell you the color and the amount of fish every time you return with the last request. There are over 5 areas with fish, and each area has either a limited number of fish you want or none at all. And instead of keeping the fish you accidentally pick up for later requests, it just makes a negative noise, meaning you will have to go through these areas 3 times looking for first 3 blue fish, then 5 yellow fish, and then finally 8 red fish. I know at this point I'm just a little nitpicky, but it just feels like a waste of time because it doesn't feel fun going around the same areas looking for fish. Well, one last thing that slightly annoys me is how long the animation for the dragon is when you need to fly around Japan. I know 22 seconds doesn't seem that long, but when you fly around multiple times in the game, it starts to add up. Thankfully, if you accidentally use the flute to call the dragon, you can cancel its use with the B button. Of course, when looking at something you love, you will often ignore or at least not think about its issues as much. I know these things can be a problem, but I don't let them sour the overall experience. Mystical Ninja Starring Goemon for the N64 is a game I love for multiple reasons. I come back for the characters, the music, the locations, the bosses, and besides many other things, reliving the experience of going through such an interesting game. Thanks for watching. Any comments, likes, or dislikes on this video or any of my other videos would be appreciated. What is one of your favorite games that you know has problems but you still love anyway? I would enjoy a bit of discussion. Currently in the annotations I have the reviews for Elroy Goes Bugzerk and Elroy Hits the Pavement, both games being part of the same short-lived edutainment game series. If you want to get in contact with me, message me on YouTube or Twitter.